Welcome to the Iron Prescription podcast with your hosts, Drs. Lynette and Stuart. We're both GPs and we're both personal trainers, though we do both jobs in very different ways. We chat about the best things you can do for your health and fitness, and along the way, help you to avoid wasting time on the things that really aren't. Thanks for listening.
What we're doing?
We said we would talk about ageing.
Oh yeah, that's right, yeah.
Ageing alongside getting older.
Yes.
And the difference between the two. I was thinking a good kind of springboard into that would be the highly entertaining documentary on Brian Johnson, Don't Die, on Netflix, which you recommended that I watch a few weeks ago. I can see it's, you know, the way things go onto Netflix and then there's a ripple effect as it starts to catch on and people are talking about it. So it's getting a bit of attention now.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
I think it's probably an extreme end to start a discussion about aging, but why not? Why not start with an extreme guy? And it was you that mentioned him on not the last episode, but the one before, when we were talking about, I can't remember how we ended up talking about it, but I'd never heard of him. And this is an unusual Silicon Valley tech billionaire who has now dedicated the second half of his life to reversing the aging process.
Indeed. Not only is he reversing it, but he's decided that actually he's going to give away his, well, when I say give away, he's going to charge you for it, but he's going to give away what he finds. So it started off as he was just going to do it for himself, and he was just he wanted to live forever, and he was going to pursue how he could make that happen for himself. And then as time went on, he began to think, this is very selfish and I should be sharing what I'm doing to myself for the greater good. And that's what he's done. He's set up a foundation. You don't have to buy his products. His products make it easier for you to consume what he's saying to consume. He's definitely taking the products that he's using, and he says that he's using, but he's very transparent. In fact, he's almost completely transparent when you look at him.
He is. You do have to find yourself. Yeah, there is what's that word? That kind of prosthetic look about him that they use in theatrics.
Yeah. He's almost got a prosthetic head, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And his skin is, well, it's more than Oil of Ulay, I know that. Other creams are available. But yeah, I can't remember how many tablets he's taking a day. Is it 120 or something?
Yeah, I think it was 125. So the first time I watched it, I was really entertained. And so it's just for pure entertainment value. I recommend anybody give it a watch, assuming you've got a Netflix subscription, which pretty much everybody has.
Yeah.
But I quite quickly got distracted thinking, this is so unusual. This man has to have had some sort of trauma, because it just, everything that he's doing didn't make sense. And sure enough, you go on to understand, you know, he's got some gremlins that he's trying to shake off. Yeah. So from the neck down, he's in brilliant shape, and there's lots of shots of him working out. He does something like 35 exercises a day. He's vegan, and he's got this regimented life now, which is solely dedicated to proving that he can reverse aging. And from what he presents, and I wasn't aware of him before the documentary, and I haven't done any kind of research about this, but I am very aware of longevity as a specialty in the US. And we'll come on to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But he really is, he really is a spectacle. What I liked early on in the program was that there was no shortage of people reacting like us, going, this man, what is he doing? What on earth is all of this for? I mean, who wants to live a life solely to live longer? That's not living. So they didn't cherry pick the bits that they wanted to put in.
Yeah.
And you can't deny that he's in amazing shape. I don't think there's a pick of fat on him. He's probably about 4 or 5% body fat. When if you want to achieve that, then you know he certainly is. And
interestingly, all the medical research shows that actually that would make you unhealthy. So his body, you're right. I think he operates at about between 4 and 7% or something like that, and that actually is deemed unhealthy by modern medicine, Western medicine. That's an unhealthy limit. But he looks great. I mean, from an aesthetic point of view, he ticks all the boxes. if we are to believe what he's exposing himself to, I mean, he has regular scans, he has regular blood work done all the time. You know, he's just one big guinea pig. He's
One massive project, isn't he? He's
yeah,
a walking
absolutely. He
project.
must be the most studied man known to man. All his vitals would seem to suggest that he is reversing his metabolic age.
Yeah, I saw that same clip again today because I was going to rewatch it all today, but I got a bit fed up after about 20 minutes thinking it's not as funny on a second watch. But I did stop it at the point where he has data to show that for every 12 chronological months he ages, it's actually only 8 months in physiological terms. And he described that as reversing his biological age, which I was kind of thinking, I'm not sure that's technically correct, maybe
No.
not grammatically. But yeah, there's he's surrounded by people willing to study him and generate this data,
Yep.
which I guess, it shows that this can be done.
Well, yes. So there's a
Yeah.
couple of things, first of all, that I think are always helpful when you're talking to people who don't understand research and don't understand data. So he's paying for that data. He's paying somebody for that data. And when you're paying somebody for data, you decide on what the answer is going to be. And then you tell the person who's looking at the data, that's what I want the answer to be. And which is why when NHS England commissions a drug, they don't like to commission a drug purely on the drug maker's data. Because guess what the data shows for the drug maker? It's very favourable. So firstly, I'm not sure whether or not he's just surrounded himself with a lot of yes people that are just telling him the right answers for the questions that he's asking and not necessarily telling him the truth. Have you heard of a guy called Rich Pitino? Should have done.
What? Which? Who?
Pitino.
No. Well, I should have with a surname like that.
Yeah, you should have done. So he owned 5%. Have you heard of 5%?
No.
Okay, 5% is a bodybuilding mega company. And 5% obviously is referring to 5% body fat. And he was an icon in bodybuilding. And he was beyond competition bodybuilding. This guy is a hulk of a man.
Right.
Beyond big. You know, he's massive.
Ronnie Coleman size.
Bigger than Ronnie Coleman.
Oh, right.
Monster. And self-confessed steroid user.
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't doubt it.
Looks like, on first look, like an absolute god of a man. You know, Thor, the Greek god of thunder, not the actor,
Hemsworth.
not Chris Hemsworth, although Chris Hemsworth looks good, but the Greek god himself, Thor, would have nothing on this guy.
All right.
Because he looks that good at the first look. Anyway, he's dead.
And I'm going to say, he must be dead.
Yeah, he's dead. And he's dead because there was lots of complications with the autopsy and bits got lost and organs got lost, as you'd expect from one of these Hollywood superstars. But basically, he had an MI. His liver was massively enlarged and inflamed. His kidneys were already destroyed. And he died of multi-organ failure following a myocardial infarction in his kitchen. And his chest was so big that his girlfriend couldn't do CPR on him.
Right.
And there was a bit that it started off that he was choking. I don't think he was choking. I think he was having a gonal breathing at that time. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is, he was so massive they couldn't actually save him because his chest cavity was so humongous that nothing would shock through it, and they couldn't compress it to do CPR. But on first looks, and he was certainly he was selling all of his products, 5%, protein, creatine, all of these things that you can buy, bodybuilding shakes, as well as all the illegal drugs as well in the background, on the basis that, look at me, look how healthy I am. So I wonder, are we really seeing a man that's going back in age, or are we seeing a man that's being injected so much with so many different chemicals that actually he's turning into plastic?
Well, It's interesting because there is a British scientist, he's definitely a medical doctor on the documentary
Yeah,
who tried to reach out to him to share some of his research. I think lightly questioned something and he got blocked. And I thought, that's a little bit of a red flag.
yeah, yeah,
So, okay, he's he's a one-off. It's
yeah,
an entertaining documentary.
yeah.
It made me want to eat more salad because his salads did look amazing. Beyond that, I didn't take away anything that the rest of us in the real world would probably want to adopt that he's doing. But it does raise this topic of aging
Mm,
versus getting older, which are not necessarily the same thing. I
no,
think we've probably, those of us on the far side of 40 have probably all had a moment either with an injury or we've just not been very well. And you can wake up and feel like you've aged overnight. And we use that term, don't we?
yeah, yeah,
I've had some people mention to me on social media when they've broken something or, or they've had a fall and just how suddenly they can feel really, really different. And we've both seen people who've had a period of chronic illness or even a nasty acute illness and seen them and thought, wow, that has
wow.
just aged you. So there's something else going on within us regards to aging that's not
Hmm.
just the months ticking over on the calendar.
Hmm.
And it'd be interesting to discuss what that is and what we can do about it because most of us want to remain young, fresh, feeling fit, even though we are getting older, I would say.
I'm not sure that, people say it's just a number, and to a great degree, I believe it's just a number. But I think what happens is a realization of vulnerability, and I think when you injure yourself or you hurt yourself, I'm not really sure. I don't buy into this. It takes so much longer to get better. I buy into you become aware of your own limitations. And when you are a younger person, when you're particularly young, you get injured, and I don't think you ever recover properly. So I see a lot of people that have got injuries and they say, oh, I did this when I was 20. What do you mean you did it when you're 20? Well, I had this thing and then that's left me with a weakness. And I'm like, well, what you mean is you got an injury and you never really recovered properly. You just went back and got on with it.
Okay.
And as I think as we get older, we don't do that. We're so desperate to look after ourselves. We don't necessarily accept the battering that life gives you. And you want some sort of like nirvana where it's going to be perfect again. And that's not really life. You don't, if you drive a car and you reverse it into a bollard, it's going to be dented.
Mm.
You can either whittle about it and think, I've got to get a new wing, or you can tap it out as best you can and nobody else will really notice it and you've repaired it and get on with it, or you can try and make it perfect again. It will never be perfect again. You reversed it into a bollard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like what you're saying is you feel there's a much bigger mindset
Oh, absolutely.
component to aging, and that probably outstrips the physiological signs of aging.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe. I mean, you have more to lose. When I was thinking I might break an ankle in the Peak District a few weeks ago, what went through my mind was I'm too busy to have a broken ankle and be rescued from up here. I haven't got time for it. And I'm not sure 20 years ago those same thoughts would have gone through my mind. So yeah, I take that on board to some extent.
You see,
But I go on.
immediately it's that catastrophic thinking.
Yeah, well, it would have been a catastrophe
There you go, you see, but
with
you hadn't broken your ankle. But I wonder how much influence that statement of, if I've broken this, I'm in. So you're already saying, if I've, the worst case scenario is the biggest impact is going to be, I've broken this, as opposed to going, if I sprain this, I'll be all right by next weekend. And I wonder whether or not it's the mindset of that.
maybe, but I bet most mums would think like I
No, I
do.
think, again, that's an age thing, isn't it? Or a responsibility thing.
Mm,
Whereas we've talked about my kids, and my son who's the boxer, runner, high boxer, he wouldn't even consider whether or not it's broken. It could probably be broken. And he'd be like, nah, it's not broken.
mm,
And because he goes, nah, it's not broken, he'll go off and finish the run.
mm.
Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a bad side to that, because then he like I said before, he will undoubtedly end up with a chronic injury that he didn't let recover enough in later life. And you'll say, "Oh, I did this when I was 25.
Mm.
My dad told me to rest, but I didn't bother." But at the moment, his mindset is one of complete positivity. Whereas I'm like you, there isn't much left now I can break in my body. I think I've broken everything, but everything seems to, I think, oh God, not something else. And I don't know why I think that, because I've been doing it for 30 years, but now it seems to make much more, it means more. I don't know why it means more. It's still broken. Uh,
Yeah.
and invariably I've got myself to blame for it. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do agree. I think there are some things where I would maintain there are measurable differences. Sleep is a massive component of recovery, and the data appears to show that for every decade older you are, obtaining quality sleep becomes harder and harder, even if everything else remains constant. Just getting into that deep wave refreshing sleep, I can attest to that
yeah,
very much.
but why is that?
Well, it's buried in Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep book somewhere in the detail there, but I remember thinking, this is absolutely true. Whatever that reason is, I'm living it now. Every 5 years, there's a noticeable shift. And we see that, we see that in the people that we treat, and what they're talking about. A person who has a lot to say on this topic, and I know you're not overly familiar with him, is an American doctor, Peter Attia.
Mm-hmm.
And I read his book, Outlive. It's not a short book, but he now is probably the most famous doctor in the longevity space. And he makes the point that exercise is the only thing that can slow the aging process. And he presents lots of data through his book, and he makes a very compelling case for strength.
Mm-hmm.
VO2 max, he says
Mm-hmm.
the data, he actually, I was listening to this clip again today. He makes the case that VO2 max is the single biggest predictor of lifespan.
Yeah.
But he talks a lot about stability as well, which we mentioned in a previous episode, is something that tends to get neglected. And I suppose if we think about the general population and the people that we know, not even necessarily the patients, you can have two people who are the same age,
Yeah.
and their level of fitness, even if they're not particularly athletic, their ability to get themselves up off the floor if they trip over,
Yeah.
is probably what you would just off the top of your head look at and categorize their aging, I would say.
Absolutely. But I would say what physical fitness gives you is the ability, and I think I've said it on this series already, is the ability to deal with an insult. Whether that be a physical insult of, let's go and walk up that hill quickly, or whether that be, let's have a chest infection. Because they're pretty much the same thing. The physiological demands that are made on our bodies when we walk up Snowdon, for example, if we go up there at a decent pace, are very similar to the same insult that you would get from a good going infection. And it's our ability to deal with that and to recover from that. Now, if you can't walk up Snowdon because you're getting out of breath, I guarantee you a good going chest infection is going to really mess with you. And if you walk up Snowdon and then can't walk the next day, then again, I can guarantee you a good going chest infection, it's going to stop you walking the next day as well. Because you're exposing your body to pH changes and hypoxia, tissue hypoxia in the same way. But if you are physically fit, because you walk up Snowdon on a regular basis, when that chest infection comes, and it will come because we all get infections, we all get colds, the extent to which it bothers your body will be reflected on what your body does with it. Now, it may start, if you're incredibly fit, we know that people who are fit have a higher immune activity system, so their immune system's constantly waiting for the challenge. In the same way as your legs are waiting for that challenge to go up Snowdon, your immune system is waiting, yes, bring it on. So you start with the infection that is going to lead to a chest infection, but for you, it doesn't ever get to a chest infection. It is blunted straight away by your immune system. So that's the first thing that we see. But also, we know that people who are fit and go to ITU are going to come out of ITU. People who are unfit it's a one-way ticket.
Oh God, yeah. And even in terms of the observations that you start to make after you've done maybe 6, 7 years in general practice, and this I would say is true whichever type of population you're serving in the community, you do start to notice the path really divide, and the people who've been fitter aren't coming in until probably their 70s when joints are starting to hurt and things need replaced and that kind of thing. And I remember making that observation quite a long time ago. And Peter Attia was talking in this episode that I was listening to today about creating yourself a buffer, which I think is it alludes to what you're describing. And he says, everything is going to get worse, like it or not. But what you can do is create yourself a buffer. So if at 40 your VO2 max is already quite poor, if your fitness is less than average, then you've got no hope of living this kind of retirement life that you
No.
might be concocting in your mind. It just won't happen. You've got to train for it before you even get there.
However, what we can say is, so VO2 max is pretty much, depending on which author you read and who you believe, but VO2 max is pretty much decided when you were born. Your VO2 max is a genetic predisposition. However, that's your maximum VO2 max. And you don't know what your maximum VO2 max is until you get to your VO2 maximum and you plateau, and that's where you're at. Because some people have a VO2 max of, I think the highest ever recorded was 96 in a human.
Right.
And that was a Scandinavian cross-country skier. And the average person, depending on age, is around sort of mid-40s.
And then for anybody who can't remember the bleep test that you had to do
Yeah.
at school, that was to determine your VO2 max. And there was
Yeah.
always that one git who just kept going and going and going forever.
Because they've got, and actually they didn't look particularly fit, but that's because they have that genetic predisposition. However, what we can say is that you may have a horrendous VO2 max when you are 40. By the time you're 45 and you've done something about it, you are at your maximum VO2 max, and it's a lot higher than where you were when you were 40.
Yeah.
So there's always chance to recover, and there's always chance to make a huge impact in your life. Even if you're 55, 60, 65, whatever you do in the exercise field is going to be better for you, and it's going to give you more quality years than doing nothing at all. The reality is, the earlier you start, just like a pension, the earlier you start putting into the pension, the greater the return at the end. Exactly the same with fitness. But starting at any time is better than starting at no time at all.
Yeah. I was also listening to another expert. I've had a week of experts, of which I am not one, but they were talking about this assumption people make. And I've heard this bandied around by people who've maybe, been semi-athletic and gone off the boil a little bit, that, well, you can't really build muscle as you get older. This kind of vague assumptions that actually are not borne out in the data. And she's actually a bone researcher. She was talking about preserving your bone mass as you get older.
Yeah.
She was talking about a study whereby they wanted to prove that inactivity is what prevents you from building muscle. And what they did was, on healthy subjects, put one leg in a cast and left the other leg normal. And they did something interesting with amino acids to check the ability of those muscles to take up the amino acids before and after.
Yeah.
What they were able to show was the leg that didn't move for 2 weeks had a much poorer response to a protein stimulus to build muscle compared to the leg that had been active.
Yeah.
It hadn't got significantly older in those 2 weeks. And what the study was designed to show was that actually the best thing you can do to avoid this anabolic resistance, as it's called, is keep active, because once you slow down, everything else follows suit. And I really liked that, because you do hear that a lot from people. Well, it's not worth starting now. It's always worth starting, always. And I really think you can probably, as you said, in your 40s and 50s, I know it's hard, you've got kids, midpoint career, probably quite senior, but it's what you put in those couple of decades that will really send you on a different path. in
And
the local gym.
there is increasing evidence actually that shows that the best time to start exercise is not in your 20s or your 30s, but actually in your 40s. So in your 20s and 30s, you're coasting. You're on that wave of genetic ability and the resilience of the body. And as you hit 40, if you start exercising then, actually what happens is you have this huge potential, this untapped potential that you can make a massive difference with. And because you've not been exercising in your 20s or 30s, you will not suffer the same damage that is created by exercise. In other words,
The
it's quite
injuries.
the injuries. You don't see the injury patterns in
Okay.
people that started in their 40s that you see in the people that have started in their 20s or 30s. So if you look at a marathon runner who has been marathon running probably, I don't know, 100 miles a week since they were 25, by the
Mm,
time they get to 45, they're knocking on the GP door going, you know what, this hip really needs doing.
mm.
And it probably does. And we should do that here, but it's a pain to get it done. But physiologically, the parts and everything that you've created it's incredibly good shape. However, the 40-year-old that started marathon running when they were 40, by the
Mm.
time they get to 45, they're still actually that untapped benefit is so great. They're doing a good marathon time because they've been training for 5 years, but they're not needing a new hip because they haven't been doing it since they were 25. So it's an interesting way to look at it. That
Yeah.
actually you're getting the best of both worlds. So when I have a client who says, "Oh, there's a point in doing this. I'm too
Mm,
old." No,
mm,
actually,
mm,
this is the big point of doing it.
mm. But it's surprising how nervous people are.
Oh God,
And again, that feeds back to the mindset issue that you've talked about. Is that
yeah,
you're familiar with Adam Meakins, aren't you? The
yeah,
physio who's very big on Instagram, and he talks about glass backs, and he's often demonstrating fairly heavy lifting with a really kind of
yeah,
flex spine
yeah.
to make the point that our backs aren't made of glass.
No, yeah,
But there's an awful lot of people who are almost scared to do anything.
absolutely, yeah.
And we haven't really helped that as
No,
doctors. People talking about, "Oh, your disc is bulging," or "This is crumbling." Oh, we put these silly notions in people's
mm,
head that once you've got a bulging disc, that's it. It's going to bulge for the rest of your life. That's very, very difficult to unpick once somebody's got that imagery in their mind.
I,
So yeah.
I recently had a herniation of C6 with horrendous radiculopathy a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely horrendous. The pain was agonising. It didn't last very long, and I was lucky to have it injected with steroids, and that calmed everything down. But I was still getting some issues in my left arm, and I went back to see my spinal surgeon. I said, I think we're going to need an ACDF, which is anterior cervical spine fusion. So they take out the actual disc that's there, and then they slot a cage in and they fuse it together. And he said, "Yeah, I think you're right from the symptoms that you're explaining." He said, "Well, MRI, CT, plain film your neck." So I had this horrendous disc herniation at C6 2 or 3 years ago. And when you inject it, it doesn't go away. It's not a cure. Just gets rid of the pain. That's all it does, is get rid of the pain. Steroid injections are there to ease the symptoms, not cure the problem. I knew that it was still there. I carried on doing sport and exercise in between since.
Mm.
And most people were like, "You're doing what? You're still lifting after that's in your neck. Gosh, why would you do that?" Anyway, had the MRI, had the CT, had the plain film, got a telephone call from my spinal surgeon, Rob, who says, "Stu, nothing there.
Mm.
There is nothing wrong with your spine. Perfect. Looks really good. No herniation." So there you go. So the fact that what made it go away was actually I carried on lifting.
Mm.
And the arm was completely irrelevant and something to do with something completely different and nothing to do with the neck. But we do get sucked into this thing of, once it's herniated, it'll always be herniated. Absolute nonsense.
Yes, in fact, somebody I was talking to recently barely believed it when I said, "No, prolapse discs will reabsorb over time." And they'd been specifically told that will never get better.
No.
And I just thought, wait, what? I'm sure there are millions of doctors giving really good advice, but sometimes stuff gets put out there.
I
That you
know.
think, what? Where
I know.
did I get this
Where did
idea
you get
from?
that from?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have to take our fair share of the blame for some
Yeah.
people feeling more delicate than what they should be. But it does appear that, according to the evidence, not just our opinion and not just our bias towards getting people moving more, that it's the one thing that you can do
Yes.
to limit your speed of aging even though you're getting older. And just to mention another very good documentary that's worth watching on Netflix. I do other things other than watch stuff on Netflix.
You sure?
But it's the one about the blue zones. I don't know, and I
Yeah,
can't remember
yeah,
quite the
yeah,
name of it.
yeah.
But again, the blue zones, for anybody that doesn't know, are these 5 regions globally where they've got more people living to 100 than anywhere else. And they were looking at what is common in all of these regions, and all of these communities are still active. In fact, the region, and it was either the one in Greece or the one in Sardinia, they're walking up vertical hills. You've got these people at 98 and 100 years old walking up vertical hills to go and see their neighbour
Yeah.
and share lunch. They've got other things as well. And the ones in Costa Rica were still riding horses. It's
I think,
incredible.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another point that I try and get across to my clients, and hopefully I've got across on here, that I don't believe in I probably get struck off for this. I do not believe in the 10,000 steps per day thing. I think
Well,
that,
nor should you. There's no evidence for it.
no, yeah, there is no evidence for it. That was it was an arbitrary number that they came up with. And the problem is that people are married to that and think that they're doing themselves some good. What you've got to do is you've got to stress your body. To be what the fitness that I'm talking about is not fitness like going for a walk at lunchtime. You can go for a walk at lunchtime by all means, as long as you are really walking hard. As long as you're making your body, I don't care what you have to do to make your body feel uncomfortable, but you have to make your body feel uncomfortable. So if it is walking 10,000 steps, if you are in that's where you are in the journey, that 10,000 steps is bloody hard work for you, then that's what you should be doing. But if you are of a normal fitness, 10,000 steps is pointless. You need to be making your body feel uncomfortable, because it goes back to what I was saying about you have to be preparing your body for the insult of illness or injury. And that's why your body needs to feel it's uncomfortable, because it needs to be stressed to learn the adaptive coping mechanisms of dealing with those insults. So that's my top recommendation. Whatever you're doing, you need to feel uncomfortable. Not like you're going to die. Although when I have a training, and my clients that are on a training program with me will know that there's certain days of the week where they will feel like they're going to die, because I also believe that if you want to get absolute progress, then you have to go to that really dark place and you have to get into the hurt locker. But generally, you just want to be stressing the body enough to make it feel uncomfortable, and that's where you'll get your long distance gains from.
Yeah, and I think to illustrate the extreme of not doing that is a case that I've done very recently, where an individual had died at the age of 67, and we're not generally allowed to put old age and frailty on a death certificate for somebody who's younger than 85. Generally, 80, 85 is usually accepted as being okay. But this individual was 67, and despite my best efforts, this person had just aged so much, was so weak and so frail that they faded away. And I mean, I had to get agreement from the coroner to be able to put that on the death certificate, but it happens. Somebody who has not done any of the right things in order to get any baseline level of fitness, and thrown in some habits that we probably should avoid, like smoking and drinking and eating a life of crap food. But yeah, you can die of frailty long before you're old.
Yeah.
And let's remember that we're now meant to be working till we're 67. We should be fit and well enough to still work and contribute to society. But and that's not that rare.
No.
It's really not. But it's preventable. But I think I'd like to kind of leave with a message that it really matters what you do now. You can't keep thinking you can just come back to that when you retire. When I retire, I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to start doing that. Well, it's better to do it then than never, but start finding time to put this in and make it work now. If you want that end of retirement age or those later decades to feel the way you want them to feel.
And I would say you've got to see it like the same way as you would a pension. If you're putting into a pension enough money that you miss it, that's the right amount of money to be putting in. If you're putting into a pension money that you can that you don't even notice you're putting it into the pension, you're not giving enough. It's
Okay.
got to make you a little bit uncomfortable, because
Mm.
that's where the real gains are made.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. I mean, we'll leave everybody to watch the documentary
Indeed.
and laugh at Brian Johnson. Right.